Hello there and welcome. My name is Paul Muller. I'm with Vision Retirement, and today I am joined by Irina S. Thanks for coming by, Irina.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to be talking about some estate planning topics today, and before we get started, just want to make sure everybody is aware that today's conversation is not meant to give anybody specific legal advice, right? We're here to talk and help educate everybody. If you do have specific questions, feel free to reach out to us. We also have the Q&A down at the bottom here, so if you have any questions, feel free to go ahead and ask them as we go along, and we'll get an answer as soon as possible. And then I think Irina also has a special offer of free consultation for those questions that we can't get to, where people want to sit down and maybe have a little bit more in-depth conversation. We'll make that available as well. Mm-hmm. So without further ado, we'll go ahead and talk about some things in life and death, right?
Perfect.
Very unpredictable, and part of the reason why we do any sort of estate planning is really because we don't know what tomorrow brings, right?
Right.
So maybe we can talk a little bit about some of the things that, when we do prepare and we do have documents and procedures in place, it makes things a lot better, right?
Much better. So life favors the prepared, as they say. You do financial planning for life. I worry more about incapacity and death. If you want to think of it in three phases of life, and none of us is escaping, so we might as well do it right. So there are legal documents and protocols. What we're mostly trying to do in estate planning is create outcomes to protect your spouse, your children, and yourself.
Now, one of the things that I see happen a lot is people are afraid of the word estate planning.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
Maybe we could just sort of dissect like estate first, because I think some people say, well, I don't have an estate, I don't need to do planning. So maybe in the very basics, like what is an estate? Like why do we need to have that word?
An estate is not Robin Leach, Lifestyles of the Rich and Famous. This is not large estate, it's an estate. You have assets, that means you have an estate. And when you die, it has to transition to others in an orderly way, ideally in a tax optimized way, ideally. So anyone with assets has an estate. It's not a good or a bad word, it's not a wealth word per se. Right, so it's just what assets you own. It's your home, it's your brokerage accounts, your bank accounts, your IRAs, your annuities. It's the whole kit and caboodle that is part of the estate planning discussion.
Got it.
Yep.
And so when we think about, life happens, death happens, obviously we want to do planning in advance of, something unforeseen happen. One of the things that I often hear people say as well, I have a will, right?
Yep.
Because if I die, everything will be taken care of for me.
Yeah. No.
And that concept is, what is that called? That's in
being testate.
Yeah.
Having a will is being testate. Not having a will is being intestate, which is a mess. It's very expensive. You have to post a bond. There's an administrator instead of an executor. We could go on. We could do a whole segment on that.
On that, right?
But basically, have a plan is the answer.
Okay. Yeah. And so, what are some of the things that you've come across in your career, in your expertise, that is some of the bigger issues of not having a plan, right? I mean, I've seen a lot of different things, personally, but from an attorney's point of view, what would you say are some of the big mistakes that people make by not having a plan?
So the hugest one is not having a power of attorney. A durable general power of attorney, allowing someone to take over your financial and legal affairs if you're in a car accident or you have dementia or whatever, is tremendously important. If not, you're in the middle of a guardianship, which is public and expensive and beyond messy, okay? Having a healthcare directive so someone can make your medical decisions. Half of my clients, I don't know about yours, are blended families. It's not a straight presumption of spouse than adult children. The family tree is no longer the traditional tree. So when a doctor has to look to who is answering for this person in this emergency, they better have a really clear-cut set of instructions. That's a healthcare proxy and a living will.
Okay.
These aren't complex documents, but they're very important in that you get to choose who is in charge of you.
Yeah.
Right?
And that's also a good point that you bring up is, who gets to choose, right? Because I know that I have seen documents that have been drafted where people have a hard time choosing who.
Yes. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
How do we break down that process? What are some of the recommendations you make to your clients when you're trying to choose the who?
The hardest decision is a guardian for minor children. Anyone that you choose is better than no one or a default or people arguing in court over your kids. But if you're an older adult, most of our clients are over 50 and they're more in the retirement stage, I would say go to your short list of trusted people. We always want 2 to 3 names. It's typically spouse and adult children, maybe spouse and a sibling, right? A trusted sibling or an adult niece or nephew. If you really have no one, you can consider attorney, accountant, or bank trust company for the financial roles of a trustee or an executor.
Right.
Do your best, mix and match. Someone is more attuned to medical and they're going to be a great patient advocate. They have a medical background. They're politely pushy, okay,
Yep.
with a doctor. That's very different than the person who knows spreadsheets and can balance their own bank account and their checking account. That's your power of attorney person.
Right.
So you give them each different roles.
Got it.
But number one, you trust them. Number two, their judgment values align with yours. In a situation, they would act in accord with your type of, judgment calls. Okay?
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, I know that when I was putting together my will a couple years back and I still had young children, it was hard trying to not only pick somebody, but then try to convince them that, hey, you're the one that I want to, have take care of my kids. God forbid something should happen. Are there any, I don't want to say tips and tricks, but, it's a big responsibility.
Yeah.
And are there talking points that you talk to your clients about in order to, try to prepare or try to convince?
To name their fiduciaries.
Yeah.
Because a plan's only as good as it gets carried out, right? So the who in carrying it out is key. So I always suggest a courtesy conversation with anyone you're considering. Just say, we'd be so honored if you'd agree to be the guardian of our children. It's only until they're 18, so it's a short-term job, if you will. Geography matters, being close by, so they're not upended in their lives and their social lives, especially older children.
Yeah.
Right?
Yep.
If you're divorced, right?
Yep.
It's probably your ex-spouse, unless there's an agreement otherwise. That's the presumptive bio parent, so there's some complexity there. If it's someone as your power of attorney, honestly, that's more of a bill pay function, and that could be delegated to a daily money manager, financial advisor, accountant, and others. That's not as tricky. Healthcare, that's a big one.
Yeah.
You have to have a discussion with that person. Because if it got into gray area on medical treatment, there's enormous amount of guilt and fear around making the wrong call, right? And medical technology is advancing so quickly, there will be more options.
Yep.
And it depends on your age. 50s versus 90s is a different discussion about when enough is enough, and that's your living will.
Yep.
So it's
great Seinfeld episode, by the way, on that.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I went to pull the plug.
Oh, there you go. Okay, so just watch Seinfeld. You don't need to listen to us. Yes.
So I want to go back and first and then go through the documents that we want to have. But so let's name all the people that we need to identify within an estate plan, right?
Yep.
So you talked about the word fiduciaries, right?
Yep, that's a global term.
That's the global term. So let's take it down to the next level. Who are my fiduciaries going to be? What do I need to start thinking about?
The 3 big ones are the executor, who would carry out the terms of your will, who would be eventually selling the house, liquidating the brokerage, rolling out IRAs by notifying them of the death, and filing any estate tax or inheritance tax returns. It's an intensive job for about a year. You want this to be an organized, trusted person, probably a financially oriented person. Okay? The second important job is a power of attorney. That is someone who would act as a bill pay legal financial representative for your period of incapacity. As people age, that could be weeks, months, or years.
Right.
That is a heavy lift. But there are professionals to help with that.
Yep.
The third is medical. It's a whole different skill set, right? This is somebody who would be boots on the ground by your bedside, who would be making medical decisions and navigating the complexities of health insurance or long-term care insurance or assisted living nursing home, okay? So these are 3 distinct and important jobs. They may be the same people, they may be different people.
And how often, in your experience, are they the same person? How often are they different people?
Most often the same,
Yeah.
because people have a very short list
Yeah.
to go to for trusted people.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think the executrix one is the, one where I always make sure that when people are named
Yep.
that they understand what the role is, right? Because
Yep.
sometimes, it sounds great, I'm going to be the executor of so-and-so's estate, and they think
Yeah.
it's like this glamorous job, right?
No one likes that job.
Yeah.
No one who has ever come to me for help with estate administration hasn't said, oh my God, I handled this for my parents. It was one of the worst experiences of my life.
Right.
Yeah, it's heavy. It's
Yeah.
a heavy lift.
Yep.
And downsizing a house and contents in particular is very daunting.
Yeah, I can't. My father actually asked me to be his executor, and I said no. I said give it to Marie or Kathy. I really, I
So
wouldn't.
you renounced. You
I did.
declined, but
I
if
did.
you were named, you could have renounced
Yep.
or resigned. So that's the
Okay.
other thing. When you're talking to these people, make it clear they're being nominated. If at the time they cannot act or don't wish to act,
Yeah.
they can step aside. That's why it's important to have your second person and your third person lined up
Got it.
in your estate planning documents. So there's a succession of people.
And what happens if in the case where it was my father, and he named me and I didn't want to do it,
You would
right? And
renounce.
there was nobody else. Like, I mean, how would that process work? Is there always going to be somebody named, or as a secondary?
There really should
Should
be.
be, yeah.
There really should be. Or another next of kin is going to have to step forward and maybe do administrator CTA proceeding if it's an estate. Your father, I believe, is in Florida. Everybody
Yeah.
does revocable living trusts, which
Yeah.
we didn't touch on yet. It's
Yeah.
another layer of advanced planning, but essentially a bank could always be on the back end
Okay.
for an estate or a revocable trust.
Okay.
So if nothing else, you have a corporate entity with eternal life and eternal staffing to back you up.
Got it.
They won't do the personal jobs. They won't do medical or power of attorney,
Yep.
but they can manage the money on the back end as an executor or trustee, and they're good at it. Okay? It's
Right.
not everyone's first choice, but for small families or families without anyone with any financial sophistication, or arguing families, or anything problematic, speaks to looking outside of your circle into the professional realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, we just had a client pass away, and his uncle was the executor, and boy, just a completely thankless role.
And we're asking lay people to do a professional job,
Yeah.
which is a little bit insane if you
Yep.
think about it. Like, how many years experience do you have? 25 plus. I have 25 plus.
Yep.
It can still be challenging. We still have to collaborate. And we're asking and naming lay people, Uncle Joe, or your sister Sally, to do what could be a pretty heavy lift.
Right.
Yeah.
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 And the heavy lift is part of the process, right?
Yeah.
I mean, it's and I've also seen it where it's been really easy and not a
Clean.
bad, yeah. And in those circumstances, they all had one thing in common, and that was communication, right?
Yeah.
It was
Yeah.
letting the people know why they were chosen, what your expectations are, and where everything is, right?
Yes.
Because sometimes when people die, it's
Sometimes.
a lot of the times when people
Okay.
die, it becomes like a treasure hunt.
Yeah.
And people are waiting for the mail, and they're waiting for emails, and they're
Yeah.
trying to log into accounts, and maybe you could share
I call it search and rescue. It's so daunting for an adult child to go into the parents' home office, digging through files and trying to piece together the assets, and maybe call the financial advisor, the estate planning attorney, and the accountant, and piecing it together and wondering, am I missing something? Is there an annuity out there? Is there a life insurance policy out there? Obviously the house is the house, but the financial accounts can be a mystery. So you first want to loop in the professional team, and then there are new capabilities on asset and liability search with a person's social security number. That's relatively new, that you can search for somebody's assets to know you're capturing everything. We used to have to look at the income tax returns to look where 1099 income was derived,
Yep.
to see if there was an account we didn't know about. Elders are using paper statements less and less because of elder financial fraud. It's more digital. So you may not have like the paper file we used to rely on
Right.
to backtrack into this.
Right.
Ideally, someone has a spreadsheet of assets that they update at least once a year.
Yeah.
That ideally, I
Ideally.
did say ideally, so that at any given point, someone could step in and manage.
Right.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that search and rescue is I've always found it amazing myself, because It seems like, way after death, and especially what you said is, everybody used to have some sort of paper filing.
Yeah.
But now with
Not
electronic, communications and, e-statements and, if you don't have passwords, right, or can't get into an account, it almost becomes next to impossible to really understand that unless you're using a service.
And incapacity.
Yeah.
More and more people have to jump in during incapacity.
Yeah.
Okay, so death, at least there's no rush. Incapacity, oh my God, there's mounting medical or assisted living bills, and you need immediate access and you don't know where to go. That's very stressful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Do you have any strategies that you talk to people about in order to?
Open communication.
Yeah.
Yep. And you have to be transparent about these things with your key people
Yep.
in advance.
Yeah.
If you're playing it close to the vest, know that this is going to come back to haunt you.
Yeah.
Okay.
I do not a trick. I every time I change my Google Chrome password or
Okay.
my iPhone password, I send it to my daughter so she has
Yeah,
at least
that's
one
smart.
person
Smart.
has it,
Yeah, password management's a whole nother thing.
Yeah, I mean, because it's hard, you don't want to, passwords today are so tricky, and I was just listening to a thing on financial fraud and, how people get, now it's texting. I mean, the big, issue now is, texting, your payment has been posted or something.
Yeah.
And then you click on the link, and next thing
Yep.
you know, you're already 6 clicks into this fraud. So, I mean, people have to be careful, protect their information, but at the same time, the communication with, like you said, the key people is the utmost important. Have you ever done anybody filming their wills?
No, never.
Oh.
No, that's only in the movies.
Yeah, I tell you, that would be, for me, I would love to do that. I'd love to film my will.
It will be contested for sure.
Yeah,
and
I know.
Your daughter, the attorney, is going to
be
be leading the way.
It would be almost reading the will, right? Just like
There is no
letting
reading
the
of the
people.
will, people. Sorry. That's the movies.
That's only in the movies?
No,
Come on.
yeah, you got a notice of probate in the mail. It's a boring letter. Sorry.
Yeah. So let's talk more about then. So we have our documents, right? So we said we have a power of attorney, right? Healthcare proxy, living will.
A will, at a minimum. Those are the bare bones. Yeah.
Yep. And so, and those always come together like as a package now, right?
Yeah.
I mean, there's no reason to do one, versus.
Risky. They're integrated.
Yep.
Do not piecemeal this, okay?
Okay.
Don't. It's not. You're going to find that your HIPAA waiver's missing because your healthcare directive is old, or your power of attorney is more than 10 years old and a bank is telling you it's stale.
Yeah.
You need to just sit down and do a checkup, fully unified planning that makes sense.
And how often do they need to be updated? You talked about a power of attorney being stale.
Well, so we do checkups every 2 years for our clients, but no more than 10 should go by. Very often people come to me with 15 or 20-year-old plans.
Yeah.
That is way out of date.
Yep.
So tax laws have changed, your family has changed, your health has changed, your finances have changed, maybe your geography has changed. This is based on state law where you live currently.
Yep.
Okay, for example. So in particular, I said at the beginning, power of attorney is the most important. Banks are pushing back left and right.
Yeah.
Even after a year or two, because of older financial fraud, know your client, and regulations and compliance that are designed to protect the bank customer, it has made it really difficult for regular transactions to happen. They scrutinize the power of attorney. It's like they hold it up to the light like it's a $100 bill to see if it's for real.
Yeah, no, we have that happen all the time, and I don't. What are is there any real rule they can't accept a power of attorney more than a year old, or
10.
What? It's 10. So if you show up to a bank, it's just their own.
Unless you're a spouse.
Right.
But I'm going to tell you as a best practice to not get in. Once the person loses capacity, they cannot do a new power of attorney. Now your hands are really tied. That's why this matters so much. And with half of older people at some point in their lives facing incapacity, this is this is a real thing to get ahead of.
Right.
Yeah.
And so you talk about accessing funds, power of attorney. I mean, there's times where people can't access money, right? Can you talk a little bit about some of the mistakes that are made when, somebody can't get access to somebody else's finances other than a power of attorney?
Well, it's a disaster. How do you access funds then to pay for their care needs?
Yeah.
Okay. And that's typically home health aid or assisted living or something else. The person, it's either a slow decline, you have some time, or it's like a stroke, an event, and now what?
Right.
And you absolutely, I tell people, aside from having a general durable power of attorney that covers all matters, including the motor vehicles and whatever, go to your financial advisor and put your POA person, adult child or whomever,
Yeah.
on the broker form.
Right.
Because now it's a direct, pre-approved authorization and or do a trusted contact or authorized representative type
Right.
in advance so that at least you're immediately getting to Paul and Dad's money for the emergency. And you can worry about the TD Bank checking later
Right.
and just squabbling with them
Yeah.
or whatever, right? On the big money.
Yeah.
And also consolidate. You do not need 50 accounts. You don't need the best CD rate at every place in town. Okay, it drives me crazy because I'm trying to do planning and they have different beneficiaries everywhere. I'm like, please consolidate.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's amazing to me, and it doesn't happen as much anymore. But you used to get the shoebox of stuff.
Yeah.
Where you were brought a shoebox of God knows what, but and it was everywhere. I mean, back in the days where people really use stocks for dividend income, right? The old stock
Once in a
certificates.
while. Yeah.
And after all the Bell's stocks split up, and you had all those, they ended up with literally shoeboxes
No,
of stuff that
you
we
don't.
couldn't.
You don't want to be chasing dividend checks and stock splits and wondering what happened. So if you can consolidate your account, keep a little one-page spreadsheet, add your adult child as the POA on the broker account in addition to the general that you do outside with the lawyer, you're pretty well covered for whatever comes your way.
Got it.
Okay, and you're going to save your adult kids a lot of angst.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it's already a stressful time, right? Going
Very.
through it and then, figuring out, the rest of it just adds to it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So we have our documents that we've talked a little bit about, right?
Yeah.
We've talked about the people, who are the people that are going to be important in helping us execute. Sometimes things do go awry, though, right? I mean,
No.
even some of the best plans. So
Yep.
let's talk about, how can we avoid money going to the wrong person, because it happens.
Okay, check your beneficiary
yes.
designations, like right now.
Yeah.
Like pause the webinar. No, I'm joking. People tend to get beneficiary designations wrong
Yeah.
or old, especially contingents.
Yep. So beneficiaries is definitely one of them. I've had situation. Well, it happened once, but it was where an ex-spouse got the money, and
That's a
and
pretty unhappy outcome.
she wasn't supposed to get the money. It was years and years and years after the divorce, and just never changed the beneficiary.
Very unfortunate.
Yeah, so it is something that we talk about our clients a lot, when we do our annual reviews and beneficiary designations, and they just, for whatever reason, there's something laying out there
They
that you
override the will.
yeah,
So people say, in my will, can I do this? That's nice.
Yeah.
But the beneficiary designation on an IRA, 401k, 403b life insurance is binding.
Yep.
It is what it is. It's like musical chairs. When the music stops,
Yep.
whatever it says goes.
yep,
And the plan administrator doesn't care what your will says. It doesn't really care about anything other than that designation.
yeah,
It has to be correct. And if you've said spouse and then no one else, it's going to drop into your estate. Not a good place to be.
yep. And we're going to talk about some of that, in terms of, best ways to pass assets.
Yeah.
What I'm always, trying to help people understand is, how assets are passed, right? So maybe we can talk about the hierarchy of how things are passed from me to my loved ones.
Sure.
So,
House typically is a joint deed, husband and wife. Your
so
wife,
that would be an ownership type.
it's ownership deed, right? So your spouse dies, it's yours instantly, and vice versa. It's clean. At the second death, it passes under the will or trust to whomever you've said, typically adult children.
Right.
All right.
So first, it's how it's owned, right? Because I can
Always
own
title
joint
first.
property, right?
Yep.
And if there's a joint owner,
Yep.
regardless of really how it's joint, I mean, there could be some other things that you can talk about with joint ownership, but rights of survivorship is the most
Yes.
common.
Yes.
And so if I have property with a spouse or a child and it's rights of survivorship,
Yes.
they automatically get the money,
Yes.
right? So
They get that asset.
They-
It's typically real estate.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so we have ownership as the first, I guess, hierarchy of
Yeah.
things passing, right? And then we would get to, I think you
A
said
beneficiary designation. So it's called a beneficiary designation when it's on a retirement plan or life insurance. And when it's on a bank or brokerage, it's usually payable on death, transfer on death, or sometimes ITF in
Right.
trust for. But they mean the same thing. It means it's going directly to the people you've named, not through the estate plan. Right?
Yep.
This can be good or bad.
Yep. as can ownership, right? And I
Yeah.
want to talk a little bit later about, because one of the common, the cheap or the poor man's power of attorney is I'm just going to put my kids on my
Yeah.
accounts, right?
Yeah.
We'll talk about some of that as well. But so we have ownership, right? So it's first how it's owned.
Yeah.
Then it's, is there a beneficiary? Mostly by contract, right? A retirement account, life insurance, annuity, something
Yep.
that has a beneficiary attached to it. And then we finally get to the will, right?
Yeah.
So if it's not jointly owned, if it doesn't have a beneficiary,
Yep.
then I can.
Then it passes through your probate estate.
Right. Yep.
And that's what your will says, spouse then children, for example, or whatever it says. So really, it's so important to integrate the plan, financial advisor, attorney, and you as the head of your family to align the outcomes,
Right.
right?
Yep.
Otherwise, you could have like all directions,
Yeah.
right?
And probate. People are afraid of probate.
Yeah. Okay, so let's talk about that. Probate is just the process of bringing an original will to court for authentication. Otherwise, people could write any old will and submit it as Aunt Martha's will. It would be massive fraud. It has an important function. Probate in Bergen County, New Jersey, historically has been very fast and easy. We have wonderful clerks. In the last 3 months, they've had severe staffing shortages due to COVID and retirement. So what used to take a couple weeks is now taking 3 months.
Okay.
In states like Florida, it's terrible probate, or California, expensive and lengthy. There are ways around that.
And why is that? What happens differently in the Bergen County and Hackensack versus, somewhere in Florida? What's going on in Florida that probate?
Florida has so many older people and so much protection that the courts are involved every step of the way.
Okay.
It's hand-holding most people don't need, but some really do. And you can't delineate that. The law just protects all, and that creates red tape. It's a double-edged sword, right? Here in New Jersey, we've just had really good, historically, easy probate. And people are shocked. They're like, I thought New Jersey was a difficult state, and not in this regard,
Right.
right?
Yep.
But that changes. And right now we're in a strange period of significant delays, and we have estates currently where people are waiting on letters testamentary. They can't access accounts of the deceased person. They can't sell the house. They can't do much of anything until they have what's called letters testamentary. They're nominated in the will as executor of Aunt Martha's estate, but until the court issues a letters testamentary, a letter with a gold star, they cannot go out in the world and transact with banks, brokers, and realtors. And, they're not official until they have that.
Right.
So there's a weird gap.
So if you don't have any other assets, right, and you're waiting for this probate to happen, it can cause some other issues then in paying bills. And
If you have a cash
other things.
shortfall, if the markets are in motion,
Yeah.
all sorts of things.
Yeah. Okay. So probate's not necessarily a bad thing, just may take some time.
It's
for the most part.
it's not terrible in New
Yeah.
Jersey. New York, we're on the border of New York, right? Not good.
Right. Okay.
Not good either.
And what happens there?
Very slow.
Very slow. Okay. So again, it's a timing. It just takes a long time, a lot of red tape.
A lot of red tape.
Yeah.
We do not like red tape.
No. No.
No.
So probate's not necessarily bad. It takes time. It can screw up some other things. So, but it can be also used to your advantage. So let's talk a little bit about why you would want to have monies pass through a will versus, because I could easily go out and just retitle everything to joint, right? Name my kids joint owners on everything, right? I
Yeah.
could name everybody, put a beneficiary
Yes, you
designation on
can.
everything, right?
Yeah.
And then it gets to the reading of my will, right? The quote unquote reading of the will, and it doesn't happen. And there's really nothing there, right?
Yeah.
So-
Outright simple. You know what else is?
Yeah.
That goes with that.
Yep.
Zero creditor protection.
Okay, so let's talk about that.
All right, so
Yeah.
you have 3 children. I have 2 children.
Yep.
We leave it outright to our children who are in their young adult stages, right? We don't know who they're going to marry or how their careers are going to go. Outright means literally wing and a prayer. And depending on how much money, it really matters, right?
Yep.
So until they're financially mature or more established, or even longer for a lifetime, depending on the amounts of money, we don't want to drop a lottery ticket on their lap and say, what did Buffett say? Like, I not too much too much money to do nothing.
Right.
Right?
Yep.
There's that. And there's also a future divorce. Okay? So for people who are divorced, we're particularly mindful of not sharing our assets with anyone's ex,
Yeah.
including our future son or daughter-in-law, right?
Yep.
That's very painful to think about. So if you're going to utilize continuing trust for children, you can't TOD everything.
Okay.
It's going to blow the plan.
Got it. Because nothing actually gets to the
No.
will for
Nothing.
for funding a trust.
Right.
Right.
Nope.
So going into strategies now we're going to talk more about trusts.
Yeah.
What is a trust?
Okay, a
What
trust
exactly is a
conceptually is it's a legal entity. Instead of you as a child as an individual, it's a trust for the child. The child is the beneficiary. There's a trustee, Uncle Joe. Remainder men are the child's children or their siblings.
Okay.
So now it's bundled.
Okay.
Okay, there's 3 people participating in a trust: a trustee, a beneficiary, and remainder men. Everything has to remain balanced,
Okay.
right? So there's a trustee in charge, who's the legal owner, but the beneficiary remains the same. They just don't have unfettered control of it.
Right.
And they're remaindermen to be accountable, right? Your future grandchildren or the child's siblings if they never have any, so that your money stays in your bloodline. Only a trust can do that. Otherwise, it's a series of promises and hopes
Right.
that may or may not ever.
Winging a prayer, right?
Yeah, or it's going to go to their, your future
their favorite charity.
Your future ex-son-in-law.
There you go. So trusts, can be a great planning tool, right? I mean, we use them, and there's different types of trust.
Yeah.
So can we just maybe go through the different types of trust real quick? And
Yeah.
Living trust, revocable trust, irrevocable trust, testamentary trust. I think people get
Yep.
sometimes confused, because they think that this trust is something that's big and bad, and they're not familiar with it. So
Yeah.
maybe we can just
There
go through some
are
of the
different
types
trusts
of trust.
for different to solve different problems, right? So one very common one is a revocable living trust. It's instead of a will. It's better than a will.
Okay.
It's a trust that is for you while you're alive. You are your own trustee, but if you're incapacitated, everything is nicely bundled, and if you die, it's bundled, doesn't go through probate.
Okay.
People over a certain age or with money, they're doing these more and more and more and more. We're doing fewer wills.
Okay.
A testamentary trust is a trust drafted under a will. It comes with the red tape of the probate courts because they still supervise these.
Got it.
Not ideal.
Okay.
Irrevocable trusts, you cannot change. It could be an insurance trust to get a large policy off your balance sheet for high net worth people. It could be a Medicaid trust to get the house out of the way for low net worth people. Those typically, irrevocable trust planning are on the high and the low end of the net worth world. In the middle, most people,
Yeah.
it's a will or revocable trust type structure.
Okay.
For people going to Florida, South Carolina, Arizona, wherever, they all use revocable trusts because they're bad probate states. Okay? Here, we can go either way in New Jersey
Got it.
at this moment,
Okay.
right?
Yeah, and so, there's also some misconceptions about trusts and how they protect and they don't protect. Even around taxes, right? So you talked about revocable trusts versus living trusts, and so what about taxes? How do I
So we
minimize
have good
on
news
tax?
finally, right? New Jersey repealed its estate tax in 2018. There is no more wealth tax in New Jersey on estates. There remains a New Jersey inheritance tax if you're leaving money to siblings, nieces, nephews, life partner you're not married to, friends, etc. That's triggers what's called the New Jersey inheritance tax because it's a tax on who inherits, not how much.
Okay.
That's still problematic,
Got
and
it.
we still have ways to deal with it, but mitigate it, but not eliminate it. The federal estate tax exemption is $12.9 million per person this year. So you double that for married. It's excellent. There's a portability option, so you maximize a married couple's exemptions. It's scheduled to sunset in only 3 years.
Yeah.
So this is why you need to come update because it's a moving target and we
Right.
follow it every single day, you and I.
Yeah.
Most people are just reading a news piece in Forbes or New York Times and they're like, oh, what's up? And it's a political football in Congress. So we don't know for sure
Yep.
which way it's actually going to go, but it's going to lower to about, with indexing, about 6 million a person, 12 million a couple. right? So tax planning for estates, unless you are subject to inheritance tax, or you're above 12 million as a couple, you don't have a lot of estate tax worries.
Right.
Okay, that's the good news. It's never been this favorable ever.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, it used to be a real mess.
It used to be very low exemptions, federal and state, and everybody had to deal with estate tax filings.
Yeah.
And now virtually no one does.
Yeah.
That's good.
It is. I'm surprised. I used to make the joke, why, they tax dead people. It's because they don't vote, right? So,
Yeah, that's 100% right.
And I'm with the way that, every government seemingly needs money.
Yes.
The fact that they've made it so favorable is really, really amazing to me.
It is.
Makes some of the planning that we do,
Easier,
right?
Yep.
So talk about, you said to me just a minute ago that you're doing more trusts than wills, right?
Yeah.
So why don't we talk a little bit about that and some of the strategies, behind that, and why a trust can basically, supersede a will.
Yeah. So trusts are indicated for high net worth people, who are leaving more money to adult children, and if you're leaving at least a couple $1 million to a child, you probably want to put guardrails around that. Okay. And that's a lot of people in Bergen County. If you're over 70 and facing incapacity due to a medical condition or mental condition from aging, also the revocable trust starts to make sense.
Right.
If you're a same-sex couple leaving to nieces and nephews and siblings, inheritance tax is coming your way, you use a revocable trust to avoid tax waiver delays, which could be up to a year, by using and funding a revocable trust.
Got it.
Right? There's just it depends. It's like a series of factors. If you own a condo in Florida,
right,
you want to avoid ancillary probate, you put that property, either joint title or LLC, or you put it in your revocable trust to prevent headaches down the line. So all the revocable trust is to prevent headaches in the immediate future for either you or your spouse or loved ones.
Okay.
Right? So as we all age, Bergen County is densely populated with aging, increasingly wealthy people. They're generally investors. We've ridden up, I know recently down, but back up, to where the revocable trusts start to make much more sense than simple wills that protect nothing.
Right.
That are like bare bones.
Right.
So it pays, I think, to sit down and look at all this, lay it all out, and solve. And very often, the revocable trust just makes a lot of sense.
And so when you work with clients or prospective clients, and all this is sort of getting laid out on the table.
Yeah.
Different assets provide advantages and opportunities for different planning.
Yep.
You talked about the increasing wealth, and a lot of the times, I'll see a client and they have a house that's basically paid for, right?
Yeah.
And they've amassed this huge amount in retirement assets.
Yeah.
Right. What are some of the conversations you're having around retirement assets and Secure Act now, right? We don't have the stretch IRA anymore, so there's different.
This is where I call Paul.
Yeah, but can I leave my IRA to a trust? Like
you actually can.
Okay.
It's called an accumulation trust. It's very specialized. It's not something that you can do on your own. Okay. But typically, retirement assets are spouse then adult children. Spouse gets the lifetime stretch. Adult children now only get a 10-year stretch. It's really unfortunate. They used to get a life stretch before 2020.
Yep.
So we look at the cash flows that would be coming off of that, and you can do that using actuarial tables to kind of approximate. Why would you leave it to a spouse who's about to go into a nursing home or who's 95? Pivot it down to the kids. Or the spouse might be in the top income tax bracket and the kids are all school teachers in the lower brackets, right? There's so many ways you want to optimize for income tax, cash flow, need. And if it is going to go into a trust because your children, for instance, are still minors, you create accumulation trust provisions within their subtrusts.
Okay.
Right? So we want to pivot with the beneficiary designation to the right person or party, could be a trust, that's optimal for that life stage. 10 years later, it might be a whole different
Could be a
decision.
different story, right? Yeah.
Absolutely. It's not set it and forget it.
Right.
And so it's a living, breathing, evolving plan, just like your life is living, breathing, evolving, and not what we thought it would look like way back when. Guess what? Here we are. Now what, right? So this is where the financial advisor is key, and the coordination with the estate attorney or even the accountant, right?
Yep. Yeah, always. The coordination always helps in, every aspect.
Very important. Yep.
So when we look at, various types of estates, right?
Yeah.
And then people receiving, a lump sum of money.
Yeah.
What are some of your ways that you talk to your clients about, what's going to happen isn't really what you think you're going to happen, right? They always think that everybody's going to be responsible with the money.
No.
And all too often, I can't tell you how many times, somebody inherits, $250,000 and they're already on the phone with the contractor renovating their house.
100%. So when people receive a large inheritance, it's like a lottery ticket. It gets spent. Paying off the mortgage, which is a noble cause unless you have a low rate. Buying that shore house you've had your eye on.
Oh, yeah.
Toys, motorcycles, boats.
Yeah.
It generally dissipates pretty quickly.
Yeah.
Yep.
And so again, going back to, I call it speaking from the grave, right?
Yeah.
Sometimes people are naive to it, and sometimes people really want to overdo it. But why don't we talk a little bit about some of the things that we can do, when we are speaking from the grave, so to speak. What are my limitations and what are my abilities to be able to maybe better off control what I work so hard for to the next generation?
So we don't want dead hand control, which is full control of how your assets are managed after your life. I think there's a blended answer, right? Set up those 529s for your grandchildren. Leave some small IRAs as a cash flow to your children, unfettered. Take the big money and maybe drop it in an asset protection trust. It's for their for the child, so that it's impermeable, at least here in New York, New Jersey, to divorce.
Right.
Not as much in other states, but pretty well protected here.
Okay.
That's kind of like the best setup you can leave for them, right? Without being overly restrictive. Having said that, it's your family.
Right.
The child that's going to be giving it away, left and right, and helping every cause and every one.
Yep.
And the child who's going to be stingy with it. What we don't know, it's a toss-up, who's going to get divorced.
Right.
We don't know who might need it because their health changes later in life. There's a lot we don't know.
Right.
So I would, you're looking for balance, okay?
Yep.
And then it's your hard-earned money, right? Shouldn't it go to your people?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And you brought up divorce, and there's a lot of issues that stem from a divorce, and there's a lot that we're not going to talk about. But in terms of estate planning,
commingling.
Yeah. So why don't we talk about some of the
not
do's,
commingle.
the do's and don'ts.
Do not repeat after me. Do not commingle.
After divorce.
If you are going to leave something outright to a child, I would urge you to tell them, honey, this is yours. I've worked hard. Mom and I worked hard for it. Please don't commingle it. We love your husband, Greg, but please don't commingle it. In other words, commingling means putting it in a joint account, paying off a joint asset like a joint mortgage, buying a joint shore house or whatnot, right?
Yep.
Because after that, it's subject to equitable distribution in a later divorce.
Okay.
Just keep it in your own brokerage account, the Sally Smith brokerage account. Period, end of story. POD it to the kids. It's separate. It's inherited property. Once you commingle it, all bets are off.
Now, how far does commingling go? So let's say that
a good divorce attorney will absolutely look for commingled and fight for or against it, depending on the size.
Okay. What if I used that money to pay for a vacation once a year?
Yeah, it's gone.
It's gone?
Sure.
Okay.
You don't get credit. Sorry.
So explain that, because I think some people have a hard time understanding that concept, at least when I speak to them. Because it's easy to say, put it over here, but don't commingle it. So how far do the laws go into commingling? If I use...
Keep the account titling separate, and then have a beneficiary on it
Okay.
that aligns with the eventual outcome. If you're not going to use a trust because it's only a couple $100,000 and a trust doesn't make sense, park it in a separate child account and leave it be.
Okay.
Just leave it be. Yep, draw 10,000 here and there if you want, but like let it grow, not commingle down for the next generation.
Okay.
Okay.
And then as soon as I start introducing income from that investment or asset or whatever into the marriage,
that won't taint it.
it won't.
You want to keep the principal separate.
Okay.
Okay.
Good. Okay.
Yeah. But people just don't, they don't think. They're like, oh, I got an inheritance, and they put it in the joint brokerage.
Right.
And that's it. And they don't think it's inconvenient to open a new account. It's also inconvenient to get divorced and share your money or your parents' hard-earned money with the guy who ran off with the girl or whatever, right?
Yep.
Whatever. So let's not do that with our money.
Right. And the same thing is true for the person that's giving the money, right? I mean, if once you're divorced, right, and you introduce other relationships into your life, right, the same rule holds true there too, right?
Really good
you
point.
don't want to commingle.
We are living longer, having multiple monogamous marriages or relationships, that there could be a new partner with their own children. They have lesser means, and you want to help them. You love them.
Right.
Okay, but now the money again is dissipating. Really, the trust creates the guardrails to keep it so that if there is a withdrawal, it's at the discretion of the child and the trustee. There's not that outside voice, pressure, pecking. We should get the money.
Yeah.
It keeps that out of the conversation.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, it's interesting. I mean, I've seen one, and I know, I'm sure you've seen plenty, but the father and mother were divorced. Father gets remarried. New wife moves into the house. Somehow during a refinance or something, they retitled the house into both names because I guess the new wife was going to pay for some of the mortgage. So the whole property got retitled. And the father later died.
Yep, of course.
Leaving the house to
the new wife,
the stepmom.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And that was something as simple as, all Dad did was refinance the mortgage, right? Turned into, a pretty
disinheritance.
A big hardship for the three kids that thought that they were going to be getting a house.
Yes. So for remarriages, it's incumbent upon the moneyed party to consider a marital trust to provide lifelong income for the second spouse, but then remainder back to the children of the first marriage. There is a solution for this.
Like everything else,
but
right?
do they do it? Not so often.
Yeah.
I mean, but it has to be discussed.
Yep.
Or do a prenup. But even then,
Yep.
typically the second wife will outlive the husband.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think I bring up some of these stories because I think, what you said in the beginning is, if you plan for these and if you don't stick your head in the sand, right? And if if you review your estate plan, it's a living, breathing instrument that, needs to be updated or at least looked at. I think it's so important because there's so many things that happen out there that can be completely avoided. Yeah. But, people are afraid of attorneys for some reason. I don't know.
I don't know why. We're not that scary.
They're afraid. So, what are some of your things that you talk to prospective clients about? Because I think just getting started sometimes, even making the call is hard. But how do you talk to your prospective clients to try to make it easy?
Honestly, we're just designing a plan so they can have it the way they want it.
Yeah.
You're designing a life plan. They could have a fantastic vision, retirement ideal. We're creating something beyond their lifetime. It's legacy for their children and grandchildren. You have the power to create it, but you have to do it intentionally and with ideally a professional because there's just honestly too much to know, right? Yep. So basically, we sit down with our clients either in office or in a Zoom, and we use a whiteboard and we draw and we diagram. Yeah, we love our whiteboard because you then have a picture literally in front of you of how things could be, or if something is not feeling right, you are just having, we stop and we're like, okay, can we pivot? What else can we do here? Yeah. And solve. We're problem solving.
Yeah. Okay.
It's not that bad.
You don't give them a candy cane and say, come to the meeting?
No candy.
And Zoom's made it easier, right? I'm sure Zoom's
wonderful. You can screen share.
Yeah.
And both husband and wife participate in these. She has a different view than he has. They have kids together, but they may have different views on how this should play out. And it's a collaborative.
Yep.
We're all putting our best ideas and solving, and then at the end, invariably, they say, oh my God, that wasn't so bad.
Yep.
And then they feel relief because it's off their to-do list it's been on for 15 years.
Yeah.
Because you've been bugging them to come, and it's not that bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's one of the hardest things that I really, getting people to do is just go seek, sometimes I just want to make the appointment for them.
Your kids are going to be relieved if
Yeah.
you get it done
Yeah.
also. That's the thing to think about. They're worried, like, have you guys taken care of this?
Yeah.
Because we're busy
Yeah.
and we can't handle a calamity.
And all the fights happen when it's not clear what has to get done, right? So, I mean, I've seen families break up not because of good planning, but because of no planning.
Yep.
Yeah, so that's another thing. We're getting to the end of time. If you do have questions, feel free to type them into the Q&A. The last thing that I just want to focus in on a little bit, and I know this is another area that you practice in, is elder. I guess people refer to it as elder care or elder planning,
Elder law.
Elder law.
Yep.
And it's sort of a different end of the spectrum, right?
Yep.
And so, you want to talk a little bit about the process and why people should do it or why people shouldn't do it, or
so elder law has been historically synonymous with Medicaid planning. We typically have more private pay clients, higher net worth clients who have long-term care policies and plenty of resources and RMDs to pay for care. If a couple has less than, say, $1.5 million, or an individual has less than $1 million in Bergen County, where everything is expensive,
Yep.
they should probably consider possibly looking to do Medicaid pre-planning. That's 5-year planning in advance to get some assets out of the way of their balance sheet. It's typically the house. If not, you're sort of a sitting duck for a spend down.
Right.
Okay, it's a whole different planning pathway, right?
Yep.
So, and that's for an older parent or for your own planning, typically when you're over the age of 70.
Okay. And the 5-year spend down has to do with the timing of look backs.
You
right?
can't give away everything and the day before you go in to get care.
No, you can't.
No.
I was confused the whole time. And so it is a planned way of giving away your money to become almost on welfare, right? I mean, Medicaid
Yes.
is a welfare program.
It is.
So
It's needs-based. It's based on your resources, as they say. And every state has very different rules. New Jersey is very strict. New York has a lot more available for exemptions and for spouses or IRAs. There's all sorts of much better rules in New York. I literally suggest you hop over to New York if you need Medicaid. And Florida as well.
Yeah, okay.
New Jersey is super strict.
Got it. Okay. Any other final thoughts before we say goodbye here that you are dying to talk about?
No,
that we didn't get to?
I hope this is practical and helpful. I hope people ask good questions, ask better questions, get better answers, right?
Yeah. And I think if I have to say one more thing, it's I think sometimes people are so worried about having the perfect plan, right?
Oh no.
And so that I think they wait until they think they're going to have like this this is going to be the right person, or this is going to be, and I think they worry too much about having a perfect plan as opposed to just having a plan, right? I mean, I'll take a plan over
a plan is better than no plan.
Right?
Yeah, the default plan is the state law, and you're not going to like it.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So with that, I know we talked in the beginning that if people have any more questions, they can contact you.
Yep, we have a website full of information. It's irinashea.com, irinashea.com, and we have a little Get Started tab. So if somebody wants to do our estate planning worksheet, and we do a free consultation, it's 90 minutes. It is a deep dive into everything, and there's no commitment from that. But if people are ready to go forward, we have flat fee options, and we go from there. So to me, there's no harm in just knowing what you need to know and going from there. So we're happy to do that for your clients or anyone else.
Great.
Yep.
And in terms of what we offer is we have a test drive.
Yes.
And normally it's $295, and as attendees today, we're giving that at 50% off.
Great.
Not quite as generous as your no fee consultation. But our test drive consists of really 3 parts. We do a VR scorecard. That is the start to tracking your net worth. We believe firmly that, you know, net worth to me is the overall scorecard of how you're doing, right?
Yeah.
It's not how big is my IRA, because you could have $1 million IRA and $1 million mortgage and you still have nothing. So, you know, we look at as paying down debt as very, you know, one of the things we try to do. We look at, you know, saving, you know, which has nothing to do with market returns, and then, you know, overall good investing. So our VR scorecard, we look at that as a way for people to measure, you know, how they're doing. Yep. We also do a full in-depth analysis of all of your investments, in addition to our tax planning observations. So we go through those 3 areas for our test drive. It gives people an idea of whether or not our services are a good fit. Very
Great.
Similar to your consultation. So hey, listen, I really want to thank you. This
Yeah,
was fun.
This was fun. Thank you.
I know there's a lot more to the subject and we could go on
Yeah.
for days. We wanted to sort of hit on some of the basics and get people motivated to do something than nothing. And I think that was definitely achieved here today. So
Terrific.
Thanks again. And thanks again, everybody. And we really appreciate you coming out today. And we look forward to seeing you on a future webinar.